Well, good evening and welcome to About the Valley. And that title is fitting because we got a man who is about the Valley with us tonight. This gentleman I've been wanting to interview for a long time, Chuck Arning. Chuck is retiring.
That's true. That is true.
Next week.
Yeah, the 31st is my last
So I'm glad I got you in, Chuck,
Well,
before you retired.
I'm excited to be here. I really love what the Capel people do in the Blackstone Valley. I mean, that's how I made my meat and potatoes here, is working with Capel, you know.
And if you hadn't seen, Chuck does a show called Along the Blackstone. And it's mostly history. You do somewhat up-to-date stuff, but for the most part, it's about the history of the valley, which this valley is loaded with history.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. Jim Pepper, who was the executive director of the Heritage Quarter when I first got hired, we did 8 shows. And he said, Chuck, are we going to run out of stories here? And I said, Jim, you can't imagine how many stories got backlogged here. Yeah. You know, and I still have a list of shows that I started to talk to people, but I couldn't get anybody to come on camera. As you know, sometimes that can be a real challenge.
Yeah. It's a tremendous place. I mean, it's so interesting. And now we have a national park. You go back to when it was just a corridor, and now it's a National Historic Park, and I think it's going to just keep going.
We were working really hard with the communities, Whitensville, Hopedale, Slatersville, and North Smithfield. The village of Ashton right there on the river there between Lincoln and Cumberland, where we're getting the local historic districts in place.
I'm on the committee in town to get the historic district. I think it's extremely important we get this. And people laugh because I say this valley could become a big tourist area.
It could very easily be. It's connected, you know. There's so many things you can do, and people go through here. Matter of fact, I believe we'll be able to put in ground several waysides in each of the communities late spring.
Wow, that's great.
You know, and there's a couple ones that are going to be at Whitensville, Hopedale. You know, it's going to be nice because you're going to get a sense of what is really about the valley with the history it has.
I want to show everyone a clip of Along the Blackstone that Chuck is the narrator in, and actually you're the director too, right?
Sometimes I did everything, camera, editing, everything. It's,
yeah.
I wish I had better people because the editor, when I editor, he's not any good. I'd fire him in a heartbeat.
No, I think it's a great job. It's very professionally done. So let's take a look at that right now, Aaron.
Textiles and manufacturing ruled supreme here in the Blackstone Valley in the late 1800s. Noise of blooms like we hear behind us clattered throughout the valley. I'm Chuck Arning, National Park Service Ranger here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And the great canal building era of England was already well underway. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 strong, from Mississippi's winding stream and from New England's shore. A popular tune that caught the imagination of the North as it responded to President Lincoln's call for men-at-arms to help preserve the Union. You know, the Blackstone River Valley isn't just known for its great history, its old mills, its quaint mill villages, and the historic Blackstone Canal. It's also known as a great place for recreation, hiking, biking, and canoeing.
Yeah, so there you go. There's a little sample of what Chuck did. And I'll tell you, you're a natural.
We never see the outtakes, so you're very kind. It's, but you know, it's when you write this stuff, it really helps you memorize it, and so it's really easy. And there's so many great stories here in the valley.
But you have, you know, your gestures and things. I mean, you're really talking to the. When you're on camera, you're talking to someone out there. You don't see them.
Right.
They're seeing you, so it's important how you talk to them on camera, and you do a great job at it. I've been in broadcasting for a long time. I work for WCRN as well.
Oh, wow.
So
Well, I picked this up because I needed a job.
I do it out of love.
I do too, but it was nice to get the National Park Service to pay me too.
Yes. But yeah, I want to get into about the valley here. We saw a picture of a loom. That loom is still operating?
There's actually, it's a rug manufacturer on Old River Road going down toward Kilkbrae in Lincoln, Rhode Island. Oh. And the building's still there. I think they're still doing it because you hear some noises come out of there. But
I know in Millbury you got S&D.
Yeah, what a story they were.
I know.
All those brothers.
Still going strong.
Yeah, they have a way. They take, these threads from socks and rag wool and sweaters and turn them into baseballs, and
yes.
other things they do. And they've had people from Germany and Israel trying to figure out how to do it, because if you looked at the place, it's like a museum of old machines.
I know.
It's, I have always thought, I was talking to the folks who are going to do the State Police Barracks Museum in Grafton, and some of the original guys who were playing that, I said, I'd love to do a story about that, because one of the reasons why the State Police Barracks is in Grafton was they wanted the police to come here to deal with the child labor laws and enforce them.
Oh, really?
And I said, there's no better place to set up. I don't have to do anything. I just go into S&D spinning, and it's 1910. There it is.
Yeah.
All that machinery.
Yeah, it's original machinery.
It is. It's incredible.
And they make baseballs for all the major league teams.
They do a lot of stuff there. And no one can figure out how they get it done as cheaply as they do with old equipment.
I know. It's amazing. And it's got to be one of the last spinning mills.
You would think, but
in the valley.
You would think, but it's amazing.
And you think about how much this valley affected the whole world.
Well, this is where everything started, and that's why the stories are so rich, because we had some historians coming here from the Organization of American Historians to look at the Blackstone Valley story, and they said, is this really significant? And when they came here, they were really impressed with not only the story, but the landscape is pretty much intact.
Yes.
And so they said, this is where America started its journey to industrialization.
Yes.
We're not talking about a revolution, because with the revolution, things change immediately. With industry, I have to train people to not only how to run the machines, but calibrate the machines, how to fix the machines,
right?
How to get the bobbins in and out. And different people, little kids can do this, and moms can do this, but it took a lot of work, and so it was a process. And you had to work there a number of years before you got to the point where you could really begin to see, oh, I think I get that. And so within the first 10 years, there were only like 4 manufacturing firms, spinning firms in Rhode Island. And the reason for that is they're all related to Brown, Capital, Omni, Capital, and Slater, who could train them and everything.
And Slater, now that's a great story about Slater, Scotchman, who lived in Great Britain, and Great Britain wasn't letting out to anyone how you ran these looms,
right?
Because they owned it. They owned the trade around the world. You wanted to buy cloth, you had to get it from them. And Slater got out of there by keeping it in his head. That's pretty amazing.
Well, I think the thing about Slater is that he understood how a factory worked.
Yes.
And he understood how the machines could work together. Now, he had other people build the machines. Matter of fact, one of the guys was from Worcester. Now, if you can think about this, this is where the innovative nature of the Blackstone Valley comes to play. He had a guy named Pliny Earl from Leicester. And the Earls became a big manufacturing family in Leicester and in Worcester as well. But he had to make the carding machine. And so he would put it in the back of his ox cart and bring it down to Pawtucket, and it didn't work quite right the first time. So they kind of figured out how to go. He went back to his shop up in Leicester.
These were real mechanics.
These were guys, we're talking
engineers.
The summer of 1790, the fall of 1790, because he didn't get it actually running till December of 1790.
That's about the time Eli Whitney, who was from Westboro, was coming up with the cotton gin.
You're very close. I think that was 1802 when that was patented.
Yeah, so you think about it. Look at what came out of this part of New England.
Well, we had a chip on our shoulder. New Englanders, and part of it because England looked down at all these rebels. They thought they were scum. They were if you think about some of the people who they set out in the Virginia between the Native American tribes and the lords and ladies, they would empty the jails in Ireland and Scotland and put them there because they were listening.
Yeah.
And they thinking they'd stay there, and they would take the brunt of the assaults on the Native Americans. They said, "No, we're not staying here." and they just kept going over the next hill and next hill and next hill. And so you had this great expansion taking place here.
Well, the Irish Scots, they started out in Scotland, went to Ireland. They didn't get accepted there, so they ended up coming here, and they ended up in the Appalachians.
Yes, that's why a lot of the music from Appalachia is, you can hear from old English folk tunes, you know.
Yes.
So it's a fascinating time, and so
history is American history is so fascinating. It's people don't realize how much there is to it and how things came about. That's what I like to know. Why did this happen? That's why I'm so interested. I like to know why it came about. But you think about it, we got the Blackstone River, which is the fastest falling river, I believe, in the United States after the Colorado.
that's what we preach. I haven't measured either one, but
Well, you think about it, Worcester is pretty high.
well, it's 400. If you look at the as-built map of the Blackstone Canal, where the engineers actually were building it and drawing the map down there, Kelly Square is 451 feet above sea level.
There you go. And then, of course, sea level is Providence.
Exactly.
So it's
45 and a half miles to Kelly Square. That's the last lock is actually under Kelly Square and part of Harding Street there.
Yeah, you can't see it anymore unless you go down underneath.
No, and its pieces are there underneath. You know, it's interesting to see that. So you have that kind of depth, and the same with the Mumford. Mumford's only 13 and a half feet, and it drops 314 feet.
Yeah.
And so you can begin to see how all these, I like to refer to it as engineered landscape of water power.
Right, and these guys saw that. These mill owners saw that. They said, "Look at this. There's a lot of power." Because you didn't have, of course, there was no electricity.
Oh no, it's all water power. So
that was it. So you need to have a place where you could have a good drop. The other place, of course, was the Merrimack and Lowell. I think that was even better.
they had a big falls there, so no
Yeah, they had
question
the
about
falls.
it. And they had that, but their canals are all for raceways for the mills.
Yes.
Taking power from one mill to another mill as the water goes through there. Our canal was all bringing goods and
Yeah, our canal was strictly for goods.
yeah.
And it was the dams along the rivers where they made the water power.
And because Rhode Island was much more industrialized, when they were building the canal the second time, we were starting in 1824.
Well, Rhode Island wanted the canal, but Massachusetts didn't want it.
Well, if you remember, the story is interesting because Rhode Island thought, John Brown, and what did you do when you have a problem? You write your congressman. So he wrote his congressman and he said, I got this problem. I got all these stuff coming in from around the world. Silks and spices and all mahogany.
People don't know. John Brown is Brown University.
Yes. And he says, I can't sell it because the roads are too lousy and I can't it's too expensive.
Yeah.
So he said, I have an idea. And now this is where the vision of the Blackstone Valley comes into play. He said, I have an idea. I want to build a canal up through the center part of Massachusetts. Now that's where we think it stops. No, he wanted to go up to a corner of New Hampshire to connect to the Connecticut River, follow the Connecticut River up, and then he thought, I want to connect to the Great North River, which was the Hudson River, to go to Montreal. So he had this vision of Montreal to Providence as canals.
Wow.
But had he ever been to past central Massachusetts? I doubt so. And so what happened is, we know there's a lot of stone and granite and hills.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine how many locks it would take?
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, because you really do go up.
Yeah, you got Green Mountains, and then you're in the Adirondacks.
Yeah.
But that's not, with visionary entrepreneurs, it's not the details necessary to get you moving, it's the idea.
Yes.
And so when he proposed this to Worcester, the Worcester was all excited about it. And the other part.
Well, it could have made Worcester the largest city in the state.
Absolutely. And Boston-based state legislature, which we know Boston can be very Boston-centric at times.
To this day.
Exactly. Things don't change very often. And they said, we'll turn it into a small-town fishing village if we let this canal go to Worcester. And Worcester was, we're talking hamlet, village, depending on population.
Yeah, it was a small village.
The only thing it had going for it was a shire town, where the court met.
Yep.
And that's because no one else wanted it, because whenever you have a court, think about the O.J. Simpson case, all kinds of stuff going on there. Do you want that in your town? Well, Sutton had a chance to get it, and they said, no way. Lancaster was another of the bit larger towns, said no way. And little Worcester says, oh, we'll take it. And that's how we got the courthouse there. But that's how they ended up being in the center part of the state there for the canal to go up through.
Actually, Worcester's centralized well for the county. But the thing is, the legislature didn't want to fund it. So they built it up to the Rhode Island line, right? Up to the Mass Rhode Island line.
Actually, the first time they killed it altogether because they needed to have eminent domain. If you had a farm, for example, I needed to take some of that farmland for the canal.
Yeah.
So they killed it right off. However, other people were still doing things and thinking about things. So the Erie Canal is taking off. And so suddenly, with the Erie Canal being so successful, it gets people thinking about, well, maybe this canal business can happen. So they start raising money again. It's all private. It's interesting. Federal government did not have anything to do with roadways or bridges. And so you and I need a bridge between Whitensville and Hopedale.
You build it.
We build it, and maybe we charge you
Charge
to go
a
over it.
toll.
But that's how things, the Lewis Quizet Pike.
People don't realize that most of the roads were toll roads.
Exactly.
That's where the Toll House cookie came
That's,
from.
yeah.
It was out by the Boston area, I forget the name of the town, where the woman had a toll booth, and she made cookies with chips in them, and they ended up calling them Toll House cookies.
Nice, nice.
And it was, if you wanted to travel on the road, you paid a toll, and people moved their goods that way.
Absolutely.
In fact,
So,
I think there was a couple of highways the federal government did build, Route 1 being one of them.
but I wonder when that was, because it's got to be later, because
It was late, but George Washington proposed it
right.
because he had made his trip to all 13 states. Of course, we still got the house in Uxbridge, the tavern where he stayed.
Yep.
When he came through, he said, we really need a roadway to connect these. As he saw, to keep the country united, you needed to get something going.
You're absolutely right, and that's a really good point. A lot of people forget about. We think about the canal and the roads as being minor deals and really regional, but the concern of Washington and Jefferson and Franklin and Adams and Hamilton was, how are we going to create this national identity?
Right.
Who is an American if we can't talk to one another?
Right, if you
And
can communicate back and forth.
Exactly, and part of the reason that the roads weren't going, Congress didn't want to do anything. New England had the best roads. They were horrible, but they were far better than the West and the
Right.
South.
They had developed them.
Well, they were Indian Pass, so we kind of made
Right,
a
we
little
kind
wider.
of, yeah.
But it was one of those things where, we didn't want to have another part of the country gain any economic edge on us.
Right.
And so that's why Congress refused to spend any money on internal development.
Well, of course, the Erie Canal made New York the largest city in the country, and because they could ship all those goods from that western part of the country back then.
And
And when they saw that, they said, what's going to happen if they build that Blackstone Canal?
Well, the big thing too with it was that helped Worcester out is that once the railroads came into play, you go from Boston to Worcester to Albany, and then to load your material on the Erie Canal, and that opened the American West, which is Michigan and Indiana and Ohio
yeah.
and Illinois. It was a huge, huge deal. So Worcester became, by 1850, there's 24 trains arriving and departing daily.
Wow.
It's amazing, and just bang like that.
Well, I'm old enough to remember we had two rail lines through Northbridge going down to Providence, because they had one for the north route and one for the south route. In fact, I can remember in the 1950s getting on a train with my mother, my brother, and my aunt over in the Rockdale station and taking it to Woonsocket. That's probably one of the last passenger trains there, because it wasn't profitable for the railroad in the end to do passenger service.
Right, right.
Then, of course, we had bus lines, but
And the trolleys were big.
well, trolley went right through, and a lot of people don't realize that trolley actually connected Worcester and Providence.
Yes, a lot of stories about the mill workers getting on the trolley for an afternoon in Worcester
Yeah,
at Elm Park.
yeah, you could take the trolley. Like buses, you'd have to transfer, but you could get there. And of course, we had the trolley right through here, going into Rockdale, into Whitensville, and
The funny thing about the trolleys, though, that I get a kick out of, and one of the old timers told me this, is that when Memorial Day came, they took up the windows, all the winter stuff. And then when Labor Day, or there was a date in September where it's cold, bring them down. Now, we all know that there are dates in there where it gets cold, but it didn't matter.
yep,
You're riding the trolley, there aren't the windows anymore, and that's the way it is.
it was wide open.
Yes, and it had to be cold when you're going down that,
Oh yeah,
I forget it, were they going
if
15
it
miles an
rained,
hour? Oh, it's crazy. But that was the attitude.
Yep,
We could change them once in the fall and once in the spring.
yeah, I tell you, but that's the other thing too, though. The Blackstone Canal actually was going to be it was defeated from the beginning because you had to worry about the water levels, whereas the Erie Canal, they had plenty of water because they had the Mohawk River, the Hudson River. They had plenty of water coming in from different areas. They still use it to this day. That the Erie Canal is still in operation.
Yeah, yeah. They also, the engineering aspect of the Erie Canal, I mean, Blackstone Canal was a cakewalk compared to building the Erie Canal.
Yep.
You know, they had some aqueducts that were like 300 feet in the air over gorges.
Yes.
You know, and now they were engineering. These were guys who were engineering on the fly. They were making tools. It's almost like say, hey, I'm going to build a car. And so, what's a car? Well, what do I need to make it with? Well, I need to invent the tools.
Well, wasn't it the invention of gunpowder, dynamite, a blasting powder that helped to build the Erie Canal because that was the only way they could make it through a lot of those.
You know, I don't know. I don't know that. I know certainly gunpowder was available, and they used it here along the Blackstone, but it was very unpredictable. And matter of fact, an interesting story that one of my colleagues came up with, Allison Horrocks. She found an article in Aidan Ballew's. He did funerals, and he would write down everything. There was a doctor in Woonsocket, right by the falls there, who was killed by rock. That they blasted some rock came down, hit him in the head, and killed him.
Wow.
And it's in the newspaper.
He was walking by or something.
Just, you know, walking by in his own business, and bang.
Wow.
And there are some places down in Lincoln, along where the state park is in Rhode Island. There also has some where you could see they did some blasting there. But, it was expensive, and it was dangerous, and an Irishman was a lot cheaper. We'll just have a guy banging away.
Well, that's the other thing, too. It was a lot of Irishmen that they had that dug this canal by hand.
And they had a term, and you get a kick out of this. It was called sweating. And I got a crew of 6 guys, and you have a crew of 6 guys. And I'm going to challenge you to see who could do the quarter mile. You get a quarter mile contract, and I get a quarter mile contract. And who could do it quicker?
Oh.
And if I won,
you get a bonus.
you go home.
Oh.
And I get to send guys to take your place. So I bring my cousins and stuff. If you win, I go home.
Oh, no kidding.
And this is how it started out that way. And of course, your crew chiefs loved it because I'm getting a lot of work out of these guys, and I'm not paying them anything more than
Yeah.
But it was called sweating. So what happened here? The Irish who were trained in England, who left Ireland, they went to England to build the canals that came out of the Welsh coal mines in the center part of industrial England. And they learned these skills. They came and worked on the Erie Canal, and they even more skills. And then they came to Blackstone, and they were just beating the tar out of all these Yankee guys, and farmers and everything. So by 1826, there's 1,000 men working on Blackstone Canal. 800 are Irish. The rest are Yankees who were really good canal builders because they figured out how to get their job done.
That's what brought we have a lot of Irish living in the area, and that's where they came from.
It's all pre-famine Irish too, which is interesting. These guys were educated, they got degrees, and they turned out to, matter of fact, Jake Powers, who used to teach at Worcester State College, who did an amazing 2-volume dissertation on the Irish, Worcester, and the canal. And one of the things that he found was that the Irish were bridgeheaders. They wanted to find a place where he could settle down. They couldn't, and so I had a job here building a canal, but could I stay on and get another job? Sometimes they couldn't, but because Worcester was so small, there were so many jobs available, building taverns, building tenements, building warehouses, and then building railroads and roads.
Yeah.
They settled down. And so Tobias Boland becomes a major contractor, builds houses. A couple of those houses are still intact there, incidentally, in Worcester. So you had this amazing ability. And then when the famine Irish came in, they were not as skilled. They were not as educated. And so there's a lot of tension going on then.
They probably were resented by the Irish that were already here.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of tension within the Irish. And obviously, the way we looked at things at the time, if you were Catholic, and we forget about this about religion.
Oh, my God. Yep.
If you were Catholic, you were looked down on tremendously. As a matter of fact, the people in Worcester didn't really want to have the canal go as far into Worcester because they were Catholics. Oh, we want the Irish in here. And so Levi Lincoln, very astute leader, and he ended up being governor for a while. He said, okay, fine, we'll end the canal in Millbury. And people said, well, they can come and build it. They just can't stay.
Right,
well,
just don't stay.
Yeah, I got news for you. Pine Meadows became a shanty town for the Irish, and the Irish were there, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. later on, they used the canal as the place to dump the sewage, right?
Yeah. By 1898, it's a major health issue in Worcester, and they start covering it up, and that's why we have Harding Street.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
The canal is still there, but
absolutely.
they want to open it up again. I
Well,
don't think that's ever going to happen. Do you?
You know, there are cities who have taken water and put it in their downtown areas.
Oh.
And one of the best examples is Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
After the bombing of the Mural Building, you know, that is a city in mourning. Who wants to go there at a convention to where Americans terrorism on Americans?
Right.
Nobody wanted to go there. So the city fathers, now they got some money from the federal government to help them out, but they take the, I want to say it's the North Canadian River runs through there, which is dry like 80% of the year.
Right.
They figured out a way to keep water in this 1 mile stretch. They put a baseball field, a minor league ballpark at one end. They put a convention center at the other end. And then they have these water boats. And they were doing tours before there was even water there. People walking in this muddy trench explaining what they're going to have happen. Well, today, you got bistros and boutiques and apartments and condos.
Yep.
It's a really happening place. Why? Water. It's Oklahoma.
San Antonio.
Oh, it's huge. And they keep expanding that.
Yes.
They keep expanding it. So I have always been convinced that if Worcester had the vision to put water on Harding Street, and I'm not saying go down, it's because it's deep. I would say recreate. We're only looking at like a foot, 2 feet of water on a prism.
Oh, okay, so don't open up the canal, but
No. And the thing is, we talked about the flooding that takes place in some of the storms we've had. You know,
right.
well, there's a lot of businesses in the other end of Millbury Street that flood in the basement. And the stuff that gets in there is not pleasant. So you take some money to clean up the water and the foulness that goes in there. And then so you redo the pipes, and that's EPA money. You dig up street, and when you put the street back on, you put the canal on top of it. And we're only talking 2.5 feet.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of water.
No. Can you think of ice skating races we could have there?
Oh, I know.
So there's a lot of, but anyhow, the vision I have, I don't have any money.
But you can take a canal boat ride down Rhode Island, down in Lincoln.
Yeah, right from Central Falls, there's a boat that goes up. It's not in the canal, it's in the river though, but it gives you a good sense of what
Yeah, it
it'd be
gives you an
like.
idea.
Yeah,
And we got places right here over by the Rockdale Mill where you can still see a good part of the canal.
absolutely.
And, you know, I was a kid, I didn't know what the heck that was because nobody talked about the Blackstone Canal or the history. We never got any of that. I'm so glad to know about it now.
Well, water was a big issue. And you mentioned the Rockdale Mill. The Rockdale Mill is really an interesting mill. It was probably one of the more successful of the Whiten mills.
Yep.
Because they had an interesting relationship with the machine shop. And this is what you pick up from the Northbridge Historical Society. It's just phenomenal. Bauer and some of the people there, just Jack Crawford,
Yeah,
just excellent.
Ken Watchell.
I don't see Ken as much as I see Carol and Jack, but Ken is certainly knowledgeable about many more things in Whitensville than I ever know. But what happened there is they made a deal with Machine Works when they were coming up with a new machine, because they were starting, and this is started the late 1920s, early 1930s. So you had fabrics were changing. You're having rayon and other types of
Yes.
things. They would test the machines in their mill. Whereas the Linwood Mill and the Uxbridge Mill, the Crown and Eagle, they were still doing the same thing. So they were competing against the southern mills and not winning. Whereas the Rockdale Mill could compete because they were doing newer fabrics. They were much more modern, and they're using new machinery. And so that relationship between the parent company, if you will, the Machine Works, said, yeah, here, take these machines and test them out. Let us know what doesn't work. They were able to broaden their selection of fabrics that they could then market. So they stayed more successful.
I remember when they closed. I'm old enough to remember that, and well, it was a shock to Rockdale because everybody in town worked there. My mother and father met there. That's where you met that's where romances bloom.
Absolutely. I mean, I started telling you earlier before the show came on about my wife's grandfather, Fred Small.
Yep.
He was he fixed looms at the Fisherville Mill in South Grafton, and he couldn't understand why this one woman's loom kept breaking. He says, I don't know. So finally it dawned on him that maybe I should ask her out, and I wouldn't have to fix her loom anymore. So sure enough, he asked her out. They went to a corn shucking festival at the St. James Church in South Grafton, and they got married. They had a bunch of kids. But my mother-in-law, Anita Hudson, who's 92, and is just spry as all get out, she still hates thunderstorms because her father would have to run down to the mill and turn off the power.
Oh, wow.
And so she was always afraid that something was going to happen to him. Was he playing with power at the mill, kind of thing?
It was a shame we lost that mill. Yeah,
Oh yeah, and Jim Knott was
he was going to rehab it.
Yep, and he and I walked through there. One of the shows here, you see us inside the mill there, and it's.
I worked in that mill back when they made chairs.
You know Donnie Small?
No, I knew a Jack Small.
Okay, he's one of the small families there, and he was working in there, and my two brother-in-laws worked there too.
Well, they press wheel. They manufactured
yep.
the aluminum chairs. My wife worked there too.
My understanding is they dumped a lot of stuff in the river from Press Wheel.
Yep.
Not.
Well, I worked down at one point. I was working in the foam department. It was in the basement, and we would get this truck would pull in, and we'd fill 55-gallon drums with this chemical. I didn't know what it was, and back then we're talking back in the 60s, and then we would dump it onto a paper bag liner, and it would go through the oven, and would come out just like bread would rise, and it turned into foam rubber for stuff in the chairs. And at one point I thought the skin was coming off my hands. I didn't work there very long. I said, this is not good.
No.
But those are the days when you moved around.
I had, in doing this show along the Blackstone, a lot of people would call me up and they'd tell me things. And I'd say, oh, that'd be great to get on television. No, I'm not telling you. I'm not getting on camera. I don't want to do that. But they talked about stuff getting dumped in the river there.
Oh.
And they pretended I said, tell me that story, please. And they couldn't get them on camera.
As a kid, playing along the Blackstone, we would find more stuff. Well, we could see the river run different colors. Of course, that happened in Fitchburg, too.
Oh, yes. Paper mills. Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on what color they were running, it was the color of the Nashua River. And that was until late 70s that they put the...
Yeah, I got to Fitchburg High School in 1975, or B.F. Brown Junior High School, then the high school, and that was the story there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I'd pick up the phone. I was the dean of students, and if your son didn't show up for school, I'd call the house, and I inevitably I'd get the grandmother or grandfather who were French Canadian or Finns, and they didn't speak English.
Yeah.
Trying to say, little Johnny didn't come in today. Little Susie, where is she? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I try to figure that out what that meant, But all immigrants, families, got to start with the first generation.
Yes.
And their kids could speak good English.
Yep.
It just takes a while to do that,
I grew up in Rockdale, and it was all French. Everybody would sit on their porches in the summer, and they'd be talking back and forth across the street, all in French. But I came from a mixed family of, my father Polish, my mother French, so my mother felt we should learn English. So we never really picked up much of the French. But I grew up with kids that I had a best friend who didn't speak English until he got out of the 6th grade because he went to St. Peter's, and everything was in French at the school. I mean, it was unbelievable. And, till the day he died, he could still speak fluent French.
Well, that's one of the things that took place. Woonsocket's a really interesting.
Oh, my God, yes.
Well, they had Les Surveillants, which is where they...
Social Street in Woonsocket.
Amazing. But the challenge was that the Irish bishop in Providence was concerned about all the discrimination happening against Catholics. And so what he said is, and what we've been talking about here, is if they didn't speak their French or the other languages and spoke English, we wouldn't know they were Catholic.
Right.
So what he said to the French schools up in Woonsocket, we're going to have to make sure that you teach more English than you do French. And there was rebellion throughout.
Yeah.
Because they said, well, if you take away our language, it's who we are, it's our Frenchness, and they couldn't, and so they stopped paying pew taxes to the churches who wanted to do that.
We see that today with Spanish-speaking immigrants.
Exactly.
We say, why don't they give up? They don't want. No one wants to give up their heritage.
Plus, I had one of the shows I did was on the Cape Verdean women, and I had Yvette Smart, who was the chief librarian over the Fox Point Library in Providence, and she told me, I had mentioned to her, you know, I asked her about that the state of Utah had just passed a law saying English was going to be the state language, and I said, well, how do you feel about that? She says, you know, my uncle came here 1 foot in the boat, the other foot in the mill. He didn't have time to learn English.
Right.
You know, he's working. And if you were a savvy person and it was a French mill, you learn enough French to fit in so you can understand that patois on the floor of the mill to get by. Same up in Worcester with the Swedes, you know. You had to lead this Svenska. There was a Swedish type of mill dialect, if you will, about how they were doing stuff there. If you could pick that up, then you might get a job there.
Right. Well, Norton Company was all Swedes. Yeah, that happened too. Of course, the Whitens now, they would delegate your job according to what your nationality was.
Really?
Oh, you didn't know that?
Mm.
Oh, all the Armenians worked in the foundry. That's where the Whitens delegated to them. You didn't move up in rank unless you were a Yankee. And the Polish, well, they might be, they were the janitors. Cleaners. My grandfather worked at the White Machine Works, and also had the farm. But you had to do two things to stay alive.
Right.
And you know, and that's what they did. The French predominantly they worked in the weaving, in the woolen mills, in the cotton mills. They would delegate that your position would be delegated that way. In fact, right down here, right on the common, is a stone house at the top.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know the fact. That's the first Catholic church in Rockdale.
Really?
Yeah, the Whitens built it because they were bringing all the French down from Canada, and of course they wanted a church, so they built that as their church. Before they built the one on the hill.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and in fact the church owned it up until it had to be the mid-70s. We used to have Boy Scout meetings there because the church owned the building.
Oh, okay.
The little stone house right next to the common.
Yep.
You know, but I know that how they accommodated them. My great grandfather came down from he actually came through Maine, but it was, they would go up there and recruit them off the farms. They say great jobs down here. Another job that the French did with the quarry workers.
Yeah.
Of course, in Uxbridge we had a quarry. The Uxbridge quarry was active right up until the '60s.
The other one was in Milford.
Yeah,
a lot of
huge
Italians.
quarry. That was a lot of Italians.
Yeah, Italians came over, and Draper helped bring the Italians over here.
Yep.
And the stories I've heard, I haven't been able to say if it's true or not, but the idea was you could work for Draper's, you just couldn't live there.
Right.
So they all lived in Milford. Now sometimes that's where everybody else was.
Well,
so
Hopedale was set up as a special community.
Yes. It was very interesting. You know, when we talk about issues today like equal work for equal pay, if we talk about freedom to dress, Hopedale was all that.
Yep.
They believed in equal work. So if you were a kid working, you got paid the same amount if anybody else was doing the same job. Women, men, same thing. We're still trying to figure that out.
Right. Well, that was that one minister who put that community together.
Aidan Ballou.
Yeah,
Aidan
Ballou. Yeah, and that's something else. I mean, there's so many things that took place that people don't even know about. You look at the street names in Hopedale.
I know. It's interesting because he was also very involved with the Underground Railroad through Hopedale.
Yes.
And we did a project with New London Day, the newspaper out of New London, Connecticut, who did some research on that. And they said with the Underground Railroad, they never went more than 6 to 8 miles in one direction because most of the people using it were also had a job in the day. So you go out, you got to come back.
Right.
And so we're talking 12 to 16 miles depending on where you are. So the next stop was one of the stops was here in Northbridge. And can never really quite figure out where it is. I've heard some rumors it's over in Cottage Street, but never been able to figure that out. The other one was up in Upton, right there on the Common.
Oh.
The Polydine and Harvey Bradish house, which is just about 6 miles from downtown Hopedale.
Yeah.
And Harvey was a brain dead here for a second, blacksmith.
Ah.
So if your plow broke you would ride your horse or mule into town and say, hey, Harvey broke my plow, can you come out and fix it?
Right.
So he'd put his anvil and everything in his wagon, and so he would be on the roads. It wasn't uncommon to see Harvey Bradish being out and about at weird hours of the day and night.
Right, go fixing plows or
Exactly,
whatever.
fixing things at different farms or things. And
Yeah.
so he could be taking people and no one would ever know because that's just Harvey out there fixing somebody's, you know.
Yeah, we don't realize that the Underground Railroad, they had to get up to Canada. Because if they were caught even in New England, they could be brought back down south. And there were rewards for
There were.
turning in
New
runaways.
England was tough though because they had this huge
Well,
capture.
the abolition movement was very big in New England.
A lot of radical people around here, and the anti-slavery movement was big here, throughout the Blackstone Valley, and these people, we think about them as being the radical fringe, but they were very closely connected.
Yep.
And they would work together on moving folks around and everything. And Abby Kelly Foster had a house up at Liberty Farm in Worcester was a stop.
But it still was a federal, against federal
absolutely.
law. It was a federal law against housing slaves and runaways.
Interesting. The city of Worcester, the mayor in 1850 and 1851, in the town message, in his annual message to the people, said he wasn't going to let the city police enforce the federal laws
I mean, does it sound familiar?
to capture fugitive slaves.
Yeah.
It's your law, use your resources.
Isn't it familiar? I mean, it's
I'm just saying. Yeah.
things never change.
You know?
Environment might change a little bit, but things never change. It's amazing. You really. That's why I love history.
You know, it's
because
great. Somebody gave me, I'm retiring in a little bit, and so they gave me a T-shirt that says, in quotation marks, I'm sick and tired of having to repeat myself. History.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
We just have to pay more attention to our past and understand it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we'll be better Americans for that and be more accepting because, you know, every religionist came here. There's a story in 1740, the Presbyterians in Worcester built a meeting house. They build it. The night they finish, it gets burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Now, what? Presbyterians, how radical are Presbyterians? And can you tell me the difference between a Congregationalist and a Presbyterian?
Well, look at this country got started on religions, and you look at the Puritans who were in Boston, couldn't stand the Pilgrims in Plymouth
Absolutely.
because they weren't pure enough.
Look, and you look at our sister park, Roger Williams National Memorial in downtown Providence. They talk about that.
How did he end up there?
He got thrown out of every place else.
The namesake of our river, Mr. Blackstone, had to leave Boston Common.
Right.
A lot of people realize that was his land.
Yeah. And
And when he left it, they said, what are we going to do with this land this guy Blackstone left behind? Well, we'll make it owned by the common people.
well, actually, it's interesting. Winthrop landed across the
Right, he landed over...
Charles,
Yeah.
what is now Charlestown, and they had bad water.
Yeah,
And Blackstone had good water.
he had good water up on Beacon Hill.
He had groves. He had
Yeah.
he had apple trees.
Yeah, he was there all by himself.
Right. If you go to Boston Common today, there are 3 monuments that talk about Blackstone. Winthrop comes out being a good guy,
Yep.
but that is not the real story. They wanted him to sign an oath, and he says, "I'm not signing any oath." And so he made a deal where he got to keep 5 acres on the common,
Yep.
kept the house, and they paid him a little bit, and then he went to Rhode Island on the board of an ox.
There is a mural in Boston City Hall showing Blackstone welcoming the Puritans over to his area.
Yeah, he let him come over and drink water, and then they said, "Now you have to leave."
Yeah,
Come on
I
now.
know, imagine that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But, I mean, this is how this country got started, though. And
Yeah, religion has been a real flashpoint
yeah,
across.
of course,
our
Roger
entire-
Williams was a radical down in Rhode Island. In fact, they called Rhode Island radical.
It was Rogues Island. You said all
Rogues
the
Island.
rogues would go down there.
Yeah.
The crazy women who were Quakers, anybody else down there, gone to Rhode Island because they're
There
nuts.
was another one, the Quakers. This town got settled by Quakers quite early, and we still got the remnants of it.
Yep. A couple of burial grounds around here.
Yeah.
I think the meeting houses are gone though, aren't they?
The only one left is Uxbridge.
Yeah. And they take good care of that. Still has some.
Well, you know
ma-
the Quaker cemetery that called Friends Cemetery right there at the end of Church Street.
Yes,
It's
yes.
still being used by Quakers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they still. I don't think there's been any recent, but there have in not too distant past been some burials there.
You know, it's a nice place because it overlooks the Blackstone there.
Yes, and that's where the Quakers were. Of course, that's Quaker Street.
Yep, of course, yes. Because there's another burial ground just down the road a little bit on
Yes,
Baker Street.
it was discovered. It wasn't even known it was there. It was discovered, I think, in the 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
and there was a settlement there, and the Boy Scout troop. I was part of the Boy Scouts at the time. Built the bridge.
Oh, yeah, that little bridge there. Not that well.
Yeah.
We cut through there on Quaker
Yeah, and
Street.
if you
a
go
lot.
over there, they have stone markers, but they're not real markers. And part of the reason was there was still a lot of hostile Indians around, and like the Pilgrims, they didn't want them to know how many were buried. So they didn't put good markers, but they would put some kind of a stone so that they could remember where that person was buried.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, then of course, right up to Grafton, we had a religious situation because you had the Christian Indians,
Yes, the praying village there up in Hassaneset.
the praying Indians.
You know, one of the shows we did, there was an archaeological dig there. And, you know, whenever you have a camera, and you know this, you know, and somebody's supposed to be digging something, you never find anything. They're never going to be when you got the camera. As soon as you turn the camera off, look what we found.
There it is.
Well, I'm filming this guy. I said, hey, look what I found. It's a big kettle. And a pig's jaw, and the other guy was doing it. It's like outstanding. They're finding stuff. This is so cool. You
Wow.
know, yeah, which never happens. There's like
Was this on the reservation or?
this. No, well, it was at one time. Most of Grafton was part of the reservation.
Oh, yeah, it was the entire.
But
Yeah.
this is Hassaneset, up by where the walking trails are now. The town now owns
Oh,
that.
okay.
And they had a very extensive archaeological dig to show where the Sarahs, the three Sarahs, lived and how they worked and everything, and as a meeting house for the Nipmuc there.
Yep.
It's just a fascinating structure and everything.
Yeah, there was a minister that came out and preached to the Indians and converted them to Christianity.
There was you know, if you think about it from the Native American perspective, the Nipmuc perspective, and
Yep.
there were a lot of Indians who were in the same deal. You know, the discussions going on within the tribal councils, you know, about their customs and their traditions. If I go become a Christian, what happens to who I am as a native, as my own vision of
Yeah.
of God, and they're very radically different kind of things. Part of them felt, well, if I go to be a Christian, then if they win, I'll be okay because I'm a Christian. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter. You were still seen as a red man.
Yeah.
You were still seen as
Yep.
an Indian. And they put all of them out on Deer Island or sent some into slavery in the Caribbean. And then the story about Hassaneset, which is so interesting, is the war, the King Philip's War, 1675, 1676. They're sent out there, and all of a sudden they start coming back. So in the early 17 teens, they're coming back to this particular site in Hassaneset, and they're rebuilding their community there.
You know, and we look at them as a Stone Age people, but they weren't.
No.
You know, in some cases, they were quite established and had laws and a constitution.
There's a Verrazano, you know, the brook in New York, the big
Yes.
bridge
Oh, yeah.
going from Staten Island to New York
Yep.
City, the Verrazano. He sailed up Narragansett Bay.
Right.
And in his diary, he didn't land, but in his diary, he saw cornfields that went on. This is in the 1500s. Cornfields that went on from as far as the eye could see. Now,
Oh,
who was
really?
living there? Well, that was Narragansetts,
Yeah.
Neantics, Wampanoags.
Yeah.
There's a story of a minister who goes and preaches to the Indians in the Mohawk Valley in New York State, and he always got lost. And they assumed it was because he was in the wilderness. No, he was in a cornfield. He got lost. So there's this long tradition of being well-established
Oh,
civilizations here that were different than the ones in England,
right.
but they were well-established. They had their own intellectual culture.
You know, they didn't build stone houses, maybe, but they were comfortable. They survived their winters. They didn't have diseases. I think their biggest downfall, though, was the fact that the tribes never got along, the different nations. And there was always warring between them. And if they would have united, like the Tacoma tried to do
Yep.
later on, if they could have stayed united, they probably would have defeated
Well, as it was, they
Europeans.
pushed the, the Danvers, they pushed that people out of town. Right,
Right.
the thing that the English had, it kept bringing people over.
Yes.
And this flow of fresh people here.
Yep.
And you bring up a really good point. And when I say we, I'm saying the English settlers, the white people have always seen Native Americans being all one. Well, they're Native Americans.
Right.
They didn't differentiate between the Navajo and the Arapaho and the Shoshone.
No, but
and
they
the
would use
Micmac.
they would use the different nations to work
Right.
against each other.
But they put them all in one big bucket, and
Yep.
and then that's why they never understood how to make things work and everything.
Yep.
And they were all very different. It's interesting. One of the reservations out west at the end of the Apache Wars, they put a bunch of Apaches and Navajos together, and they did it because they both spoke a type of Athabascan language, but they hated each other. They were mortal enemies.
Yeah.
I mean, history is kind of rich in the ironies that come out of this stuff.
What we did, though, I mean, look what Andrew Jackson did when he tried to relocate. You had Cherokees who actually had mansions in the South. They were planters. They had huge plantations. They were very successful. They grown into the society, but because they were Native American, oh, you're out of here.
Wanted their land.
Yep.
The War of 1812 was really about land grab of
Yeah.
the southern states.
Yes.
New Englanders didn't want to go to war.
No.
And we got hammered the worst. There was soup kitchens in Gloucester and Salem because they couldn't, there were the blockades.
There were no imports, right?
And sailors couldn't go out, so they were destitute almost. It was a fascinating time frame.
It is. I mean, a lot of people don't realize the real history. We get the sugar-coated stuff taught in school, and I always said you got to teach real history, what really took place, and people would find it much more interesting.
Well, textbooks do us no favor. It was better to read some of the books like you've come across and I've
Yes.
come across, and they're
I go to Barnes and Noble and look for real history books.
there's some great books out there that from real scholars. It's readable.
Yes.
Nathaniel Philbrick writes some really good histories.
Yep.
It's readable. It's a narrative. It's kind of
You can find some local guys that do real good history stuff. There's so much around here. Around Mount Wachusett was a very big Native American.
absolutely.
They worship Mount Wachusett because they thought that was something special. It's
Well, that's where
hill coming out of nowhere.
Mary Rowlandson was actually given
Yes.
back to her
Yes.
family there at Redemption,
Redemption Rock.
Yes.
Yep.
Right
And
there in Princeton.
She was a victim of the King Philip Wars.
Yes.
When they destroyed Lancaster. Her husband happened to be in Boston trying
Otherwise,
to
they
get
might
help.
have been dead.
Yeah. And to hear what took place, I mean, they would take babies and slam them against a tree to kill them. But why'd they do that? Because we did the same to them.
Yeah.
And
they were moving. They had to move. The crying baby was going to slow you down.
you're right. We talk about Indian scalping. Who gave them the concept? It was Americans. It was the British who paid for them to do that. That's how they learned how to scalp. I mean, you got to get real history and find out that it's a lot different than what you see in the Hollywood movies.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
But Mary Robinson was a very interesting story. She went all the way up to Canada with him.
Yeah. She had sewed and she gained his trust and
Yeah.
was able to come back to civilization.
But can you imagine what that had to be like for her?
Well, I've thought about that. And the people who came to New England and started living in the winters in Lancaster and Sutton and in Northbridge here, they had to be hardy people to stay alive.
Oh, yeah.
The ones who survived were hardy people.
Yep.
There's a marvelous book that talks about this is Laura Ulrich Thacker, who wrote The Midwife's Tale. And it's based on the diaries and journals of Martha Ballard, who was a midwife up in, it's Maine, but was Massachusetts at the time.
Right.
It's a fascinating story. You see how rugged the landscape she went to go and help a woman give birth.
Oh.
It's just, she writes in one of them, got in a canoe, went to so-and-so, got out, sank in the muck, in the mire, had to change.
We can't even picture how that had to been. You talk about Maine. How about Benedict Arnold making that trip up through northern Maine in the winter to try to get to Canada, to Quebec, with an army? And we can't think about how you try walking through the woods in the winter and think about these guys are out in the middle of nowhere. And you,
Absolutely, absolutely. It's you know, the strong, hardy aspect of those who survived at the time.
or General Knott bringing those cannons from
Oh yeah,
you know, you can see that trail, but it wasn't paved roads then.
no, no. Pulling those things over from Ticonderoga,
Yeah.
amazing.
I mean, it's just what these people endured is just. Of course, they endured it because they knew no other way.
Well, you know, it was, what were your options?
Yeah,
You know, if you didn't do that, you're going to die. You're going to be
Yeah.
out in the middle of the woods.
but you had no other option. I mean, you weren't going to jump in a car, so you did what you had to do,
Right.
and you didn't think about it because you didn't know of any better way.
Matter of fact, this whole time frame, when we're talking about the beginning of the 1800s, you know, farmers were still taking their goods to market in the same manner that Julius Caesar did, with an ox-drawn cart.
Yeah,
You know, oxen were really were here in the valley much longer than horses, because I could train the family, the kids and the daughters and mom, to handle the ox, who do stuff.
and it was stronger.
They were stronger and they were slow moving, but they wouldn't. The horses could be a little flighty at times.
Yep.
It wasn't until the Civil War that really horses came here to the Blackstone Valley. Matter of fact, there's a place in Sutton that was called Ox U, where he would go. He would have these long teams of oxen that he would bring down from in the main street there, and he would the little ones to the big ones. They'd all trained in how to work in pairs and turn and he and haw and
You can see that if you go to Sturbridge Village.
yeah. Yeah, well, it would start here, and you know, the
Yeah.
Smithsonian Magazine wrote up Sutton, Massachusetts as being the place where this was called Ox U, because you go buy a train.
Well, hey, still an agricultural community.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's amazing though when you think about how it was like. Life must have been like back then. You know, especially, I mean, you were really out, when you lived out here back in the early 1700s, late 1600s. You were in the wilderness. You were
Yep.
away from the coast. You were in the real wilderness.
That's why during the Revolutionary War, Worcester was thought to be such a wild place that you'd never, because that's where they put a lot of the gunpowder and munitions was in Worcester.
Yeah.
Because the British troops could never get out here because there was too much danger along the way. And when they
Yeah.
got there, where would they be? You know.
Exactly. Hey, we're going to have to wrap it up. But this has been great, Chuck.
Well, I enjoyed it very much, Harry. I do like talking about history. And the Blackstone Valley is a very special place. And I've been very fortunate to spend almost 25 years here,
Yeah.
working with the wonderful people of the Blackstone who have allowed me to tell stories and come into our
I'd love to
houses.
have you come back.
Sure. I just wouldn't be in uniform.
Well, that's all right, because we could just sit here and talk history for an hour.
Sure, we could take a topic, you know, the
Yeah.
mills, labor, you know, we talk about,
We covered it from the beginning right up.
we did a lot.
Yeah,
But sure, I'd be happy to come back sometime.
great. Okay, hey, I'm glad you made it to the Rangers job because you did a great job.
Well,
and
thank you. I thank the people of
We
Blackstone.
got a great, you got a great legacy you left behind here along the Blackstone.
Cool. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Chuck. Good luck in your retirement.
Oh, yeah, I got things to do, more stories to tell.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be, next week our guest is going to be Miss Campanelli, who is running for Register of Deeds. So we'll see you next week on About the Valley.